Hey Tathagat, welcome to the show.
Hey Vidhi, thanks for having me here.
I think that might be coming across through my writings as well. Like you mentioned, I attend a lot of conferences, a lot of events, and everywhere one theme is common. People ask this question quite a lot is, hey, what are you doing in the generative AI domain, in that space, in your company, at your workplace these days? So do you hear that a lot as well? Do you think it's more noise than signal? What do you think about this hype? Or is it really a hype?
That's a good question. I would even say it's quite loaded question because yes, there is a lot of hype, no doubt about it. But simply because of two or three things. One is I think there's a lot of updates in the media around it. So there's a lot of media-led hype that it's coming, and then you see all kind of financial hype. You have a lot of investments happening and so on. And then the third part is really people are talking about the impact of generative AI, how it's going to transform firms, it's going to even transform industries and potentially even disrupt the societies. So people are talking at all the levels, and depending on like most of the people will fall in one of them. So obviously, even if some people may say, hey, my company is not doing anything, but I think when they hear about it and say hey, how it's having an impact on the job scene, or how it's having an impact on how, let us say, if I'm a patient, how the healthcare will change for me, or if I'm a consumer, how the e-commerce and retail will change for me, or if I'm going to be a commuter, then how it's going to have an impact on how I drive and how I get to my office and so on. So I think people are looking that there is no one single touch point. There are multiple use cases of generative AI, and one way or the other, they will get impacted, hopefully positively. But they are definitely concerned and they want to know more about it.
Yeah, definitely. And one thing that you rightly touched upon, Tathagat, is on the financial hype, right? So hype overall is a big thing in itself. And financial hype is when you have a lot of investments happening. And that's, I think, good as well, because we all know it's iPhone moment, transformative, and, the whole disruption that's happening in this space, which means that initially you'll need to put in a lot of money, right? I think strangely enough, I wrote a couple of months ago an article which says that, from .com bubble to .ai bubble. So do you think it's a bubble, or how close are we to that? And or what I think also is happening is in technology space, as you kind of become more mature with the innovation, that bubble kind of starts becoming a reality. Now you're not just living into that bubble space, because the rate at which the investments are also happening, the investors are also being more cautious. They're not just going with the hype, oh, you're just doing something in Gen AI, here's my check. Right? They're not doing that.
Correct. No, you're right. I think it's not, there might be an element of, let us say, inflated expectations. I don't disagree with that. But calling it an outright hype at the technology level across all the industries would be a little bit of an exaggeration. In some areas, there may be a higher propensity for adoption. In some areas, there might be commensurate to the risk, definitely the public risk of that. The safeguards may need to be much higher. So hence the concerns may be justified in those areas. But if we look at the history, at least the last 400 years of history of financial bubbles from tulip mania days, we have seen that the human nature is such, right? We tend to believe in magic. We tend to believe in superlatives. We tend to believe in solutions that are going to be out of the world and that are going to transform everything and so on. I don't think generative AI is the first of its kind. I mean, I'm sure on the internet, we keep looking at things and people talk about electric vehicles. 100 years back, there were technologies that were being developed around electric vehicles. People are talking about, even now, we haven't seen that as a full-scale adoption. So is it a hype? Is it a bubble? It's difficult to say because in some pockets, there is an adoption. In some pockets, there is lower adoption. Similarly, during my research, I was looking at one of the examples from human biology. And stem cells is one such technology. More than 25 years back, it was heralded as the panacea, literally panacea, that it's going to cure us from all the maladies that human beings suffer from. It's been 25 years and counting, but we haven't really gotten to the point where it is a everyday reality as yet. So some of these technologies take time. And I think we are so used to the idea of getting everything served instantly, whether it is real-time communication across the world. I mean, we are in two different continents and we are able to communicate in real-time basis. People are, I think, expecting that a lot of those promises will be made good in a very, very short period of time. So I think hype has a time angle. A lot of times people don't recognize the time angle of hype, that what may be appearing to be hype may become a reality in a matter of time. So I think I would be taking a guarded and a middle of the road approach and say, yes, in some areas, the claims are highly exaggerated and the reality may yet to catch up with that. But in many areas, the technology is already being adopted to a certain measure. And if you ask those people, they may not say that there is any hype in that. It's an everyday reality already. So I think it's a little nuanced in my view.
Absolutely, I agree with that. The specific part where you mentioned that it's human tendency to kind of go with what I can call as instant gratification. If I put in money, when am I going to get the returns? And the very succinct way that you have put it is that even if there is a hype, it has a time angle to that, which is what most of us miss, right? There's also a notion of this shiny syndrome, next shiny syndrome. Like, what is it that I can talk about day in, day out, and then, make my teams work on it? Because everybody is doing that catch up phase, in the catch up phase as well. That also reminds, like, I was reading on, people saying, hey, this, look at this Nvidia stock going this much and all those things. And then there are people who are saying it's not an overnight success. Like, this company has been in existence for decades, right? For them, like, now we are seeing that shovels kind of graphics and the memes that people are throwing around, right? But yeah, it's a game of consistency, persistence, and then opportunity meeting the preparation that you have done. And that's how I think the long-term gains come.
To add one more thing to that one, Vidhi, which is like, if we look at the macro level sort of economic cycles, if you see, let's say 300 years back or so, I think the biggest industry of its time were things like cotton or things like sugarcane, which were basic, or even things like the rubber plant, because these were some of and the spices, of course, that got the Europeans to spread all over the world and come to India and so on. So these were really the biggest technologies. And then after that, as we kind of started seeing the power of technology coming in, a lot of these industries kind of became commodity. And then the new industries took over. So what I mean by the new industries are, for example, things like mining and shipbuilding or even timber. So a lot of those things. And then in the 20th century, we saw how mass production kind of became the most dominant industry. And then in the second half of it, we saw the computers. So the whole information technology kind of became the big thing. So I think to me, it is, if I stand sufficiently away from the scene and look at the last 300 years of history, these patterns are not unique to only AI or generative AI alone. There is a time and day for each of the industries that keep coming, and there is a new technology that comes and becomes the most important one, and it has its own run. So I think people believe that this is the single most important technology of our time that's going to have a much lasting effect for the foreseeable future. And hence they are justified to look at it and say, hey, I believe, because some people talk about quantum will come, but I think quantum is still some time away. There is still a lot of work yet to happen on that. I mean, even AI, predictive AI, the pre-generative AI part wasn't as if it was like all over the place. It was all having obviously a successful run, but it was not kind of a commonplace sort of a thing. So technology adoption and diffusion takes a lot of time before it can become mainstream. So I think given that we may expect that next 10, 15 years are going to be really very intensive with this technology, I think it's justified that people have high expectations about the technology. And yeah, I mean, if we look at the landscape around us, what other technology do we see that seems to hold so much of power, so much of potential in it? So I think to me, it's a well justified thing, even though there is hype, even though there are other challenges of technical limitations. I'm still a believer that this is a great thing happening. We live in the age of like you talked about, instant gratification. I think we also have the instant communication happening in the world. So like I remember reading about the Industrial Revolution, the first one, I think it took some 40 or 50 years for the first Industrial Revolution to spread just in mainland Europe itself. So we're not even talking about rest of the world or coming to Asia and so on. So even within the same continent, of course, it started on the island England and then it went to the continental Europe. It took 30, 40 years to even spread there or probably hit a tipping point. So because the communication networks were not there, how do you spread the knowledge? How do people really learn about certain things? So for example, if we read the work of people like luminaries like Everett Rogers, who talked about the diffusion of innovation, he talked about how in the societies, the communication networks actually play a very important role, because the people, when they are connected by the communication networks, the adoption seems to have a positive influence on that. And you are absolutely right. I think the social media has changed the game, because anyone that is happening and something new comes up, suddenly it is on the social media platforms. And it does not have to wait for multiple years before the human carriers of information will take that information from place A to place B and spread it, like in the olden days, probably they used to do. But they are now actually instantly getting transmitted. And depending on what radio stations you are tuning to, you are probably able to get the information very fast. and you are able to spread them much further. So I think the role of social media has absolutely been magnificent in terms of really cutting down the time that it takes for the information cascading to happen across continents, across societies, across wherever people are living.
Do you think that information arbitrage has reduced because of this? Because that's the place where people generally chime in and kind of make fortunes in most of the cases.
So I would take a little yes and a no approach. I think the chasm between those who have the information and those who do not have continues to be high. And merely having the data and the facts at your disposal does not really make somebody well informed, and least of it more educated, and definitely not wiser. Because the same internet has been available. Let's unpack the whole thing. Before generative AI as well, most of the places where the free internet is available on this planet, they had exactly same information available on Wikipedia, or even whatever are the public resources of information behind that are not behind a paywall. Did that have a dramatic improvement into people's life? Did it change the let us say the GDP of a country simply because of the fact that they had better access to the information? I don't believe so. I don't believe that just having the resources available is going to dramatically change the fortunes of a society or a country. The same way, the information arbitrage, the medium is available, the tools are available. Today, you have much better access to the information. But I always look back at the old saying, like a fool with a tool is still a fool kind of a thing. If I do not really know how to use that, I do not know how to harness the power of the technology properly. I do not know how to really put it to use. Like I might have an information that actually tells me what are the weather patterns for the last 100 years. Now, so what? So what? If I'm not really using it, if I'm not applying it for actually improving my sowing patterns so that my agricultural yield is going to be better, I can I can do some crop rotation to make sure that I put the crops that have a harvest cycle aligned to my generally monsoon season, then it is of no use. In fact, that also brings me to the point of generative AI. A lot of people believe, obviously, as we know, that one of the biggest game changers with generative AI is that it gives the power to everybody to be creative or generate the new content there. Now, look at it this way. Let us say there's a company of 10 people, and magically there is I'm taking the same kind of a Turing test kind of an analogy. Maybe there is another room that opens up in their company, and in that room, there is unlimited amount of information available. Call it through internet, call it through generative AI, call it through 5 more experts who come and join that company. Does it mean that the company actually becomes radically different and really starts really leveraging the power of information arbitrage, and they are able to actually become better in some way, shape, or form? I don't believe that is really the case there, because it is how we apply the kind of problems we are solving, the way we are able to adopt the technology, the way we are able to, the way it actually has a larger impact on changing the lifestyle of the people, the living conditions of people. I think to me, that is far more important than just creating the bare bones kind of a thing and say, hey, now you have the information, do whatever you want to do. So I don't know if that made sense, but that's how I kind of look at it.
And then can I summarize it saying that having an eye for opportunity, critical thinking, problem solving attitude, and having that element of creativity thinking outside the box and being actually able to act on whatever information you know, rather than, like you're mentioning, even if the tools are available, but I don't know how to make the best use of those tools, how to leverage technology as powerful as GenAI that we are talking about, then even if you have all the information at your fingertip, you are not able to make the best out of it.
Oh, absolutely. And I would totally agree with you on that. I mean, the history is full of examples where people have discovered things which were like lying in the plain sight of everyone. People have invented things that were obvious in the hindsight and say, oh, if only I would have thought of it. I saw it every single day, but I didn't realize that kind of a thing. So I think absolutely agree with you that what you do with that, it doesn't really matter if you continue to not change your behavior or not really change the way things happen around you. But yes, it is the application of that to really solve the hard problems that to me is really the differentiator.
Okay, that's cool. I think somewhere during our discussion, you mentioned that it came as part of your research. So can you like elaborate a bit more on what research you were doing and, what made you inquisitive about doing that research and how long have you been into that space?
Sure, absolutely happy to talk about that. So I'm doing my doctoral research. I'm almost at the end of it now. I've been in the doctoral program for the last 5 years. And my interest area was to learn about how do we explain the successful adoption as well as the failures of adoption in generative AI And the frame that I've taken is inside the firms. And the reasoning was very simple. On one hand, we have these huge projections of multi-trillion dollar economic impact of generative AI in the next coming years. On the other hand, when we look at the anecdotal data, and I call it anecdotal because it's not a scientifically procured or curated data. A lot of it is coming from the vendors themselves. A lot of that is not going through a scientific rigor of peer review and so on. The data seems to suggest that a unusually high number of initiatives are failing. Many of them are failing in piloting itself. They never get to see the light of the day in the production scenario. Even if they get to the production, the ROI does not seem to be high. So on one hand, we are seeing a lot of interest. There's a lot of hype. You talked about the hype element in the beginning of our talk. So people are definitely interested and they jump into that. But they realize at some point in time that, hey, it's not quite the same as what I thought it's going to be. And then they realize that while I have to do it because of multiple other compulsions, maybe there is a lot of pressure on them. There's a lot of fear of missing out. But there are a lot of other things that do not meet the eye in terms of, are we ready for it? In fact, I've reframed the question of saying, sometimes people say, is AI ready? I think the more important question is, are we ready?
Yeah.
Maybe AI is ready in whatever shape and form it as a firm. Are we ready as individuals to have AI agents and AI technologies within a part of our life and really working with us? So I think a lot of issues around technology adoption, change management, etc., were something that I could not find a satisfactory answer for. And hence, I decided to pursue exploring that particular area. So that's been really the area of research for me.
What is driving successful adoption versus what is the reasons for the failure? Can you share some of the top findings and the difference that you see between a successful and a failing company?
Sure, absolutely. And I think just to add to one more point, why it is important is I think failure mode analysis is a very recognized way of problem solving in the engineering branches. We learn so many things from the failure mode analysis, whether it's mechanical engineering or whether it is structural engineering. Even there is a reason why the aeroplanes have a black box, because yes, I mean, we all build the systems with utmost rigor and we hope that there are no incidents. But then if there is one, we do definitely want to know what caused that, and with the hope that we are able to go back and really improve the system so that next time we have minimal chances of the same thing recurring. The engineering mindset is really all about being able to look at failure mode analysis to kind of flow back those learnings into the process.
Do you think failure has a negative connotation to it?
Absolutely. It is. It's very difficult. I think most of the human nature and the societies and the cultural nuances are such that it's not easy to get a social acceptance if they come across as being a failure at something. We talk about a lot. I think a lot of mindsets have changed in the last 10-15 years, but the reality is that human beings are still largely accomplishment driven. A lot of societies, I mean, like when I look at in our country in India, I think we are a very highly accomplishment driven society. It's not easy for somebody to actually stand up and say, hey, you know what? I've done 5 projects and I've failed 4 of them, give me a promotion or something like that, right? Whereas the reality is that we all like to talk about the fact that fail fast, fail forward, and failure leads to better ideas and all the nice slogans on the wall. But to take the culture of a company and change it in such a way that it embraces the culture of trying and failing, I think there's a lot of difference between saying it and actually doing it. So it's a hard thing to sell in my view. I wanted to study the failure patterns for my research. I realized that a lot of people may actually get a little reserved by the negative positioning of failures. And hence, I did not call my research as understanding the failure modes, because I realized that calling it failure mode itself is going to bias a lot of people around that. And like, why are you looking at failures? Everybody's talking about success. Why are you really interested in that? Are you putting words in my mouth that this is more of a failure thing? For the firms, it is important because any generative AI adoption or any technology adoption for that matter takes a lot of time, effort, and money for the organization. And not to mention the opportunity cost, because it's not even at a certain level talking about the fact that, hey, we wasted X million dollars or whatever. The reality is we could have done something better with that. And we live in tough economic times when companies don't have all the money. So how do they make best use of that? So what I found was in my research, there were 3 or 4 major kind of call outs that I would say. One is it actually created a very good visibility into what are the necessary preconditions for successful adoptions for that matter. I'll also come to what I call as the adoption, because with generative AI, a lot of people have very different notion of what is adoption and what is successful adoption. So I'll come to that in a moment. But I found that, for example, having a robust, reliable technology is an absolute must, because if your technology itself is not really sound, then that becomes a challenge. Now, obviously, a lot of people believe that the current Gen AI technology has a lot of issues. We have bias, we have hallucination. We understand that. But to me, it is like, tell me one technology that does not have its failure modes. Everything has a failure mode, everything has limitations around that. So, obviously, we learn how to respect. We work towards identifying and knowing those limitations, and then we build solutions that really make sure that we are operating within the boundaries of those specified parameters. So that's the first thing. Second is, I think the whole aspect of data is coming out loud and clear. No surprises there. But I think the bigger thing with Gen AI that's coming is the whole issue of IP leakage and dealing with somebody else's IP. I think those are becoming a big issue, because now you have a situation where you're dealing with the content. You're not dealing with the quote unquote diffusion data or an emission data sort of a thing. You're dealing with the actual data and not the sort of a metadata around it. Like, I'm not just looking at and saying how many times did people click on a certain page. I'm saying what exactly they clicked on. That is more important than how many times they clicked on, that kind of a thing. So obviously, there can be a lot of confidentiality issues around it. And I think, given simply by the fact that a lot of Gen AI platforms today, the publicly available ones, have been pre-trained on public internet, we do not know if there is a IP protection, IP protected data, or it is IP violated data. So those are now at a B2C level. I'm creating my images for my arts competition. I'm writing some essay and I'm taking some ideas on it. They seem to be innocuous use cases. But if I'm a firm and I'm using it for something, then I might risk a lot by actually, I don't even know at this point in time whether I'm using something which may be potentially somebody else's IP. So I think data in that sense gets a new meaning that the firms have to be extra careful about, especially in a B2B context. So that's the thing. The third thing that came out to me was really the human element that has come out very loud and clear to me. And I want to really spend a couple of minutes on that. I think, to me, the fact that it's a technology, it can do a lot of things for you, is a given. I think over a period of time, we see increasingly things that can be doing. Even 30 years back, we had the CNC machines. You did not need a human operator to actually sit on a machine. All you had to do was do the programming, and the CNC machine would do the cutting for you, or whatever was the operation they wanted to do. You could even multi-program them. I remember back in early 90s going to I was in Pune and going to one of the, I won't tell the name, but one of the large vehicle manufacturer. And I hardly saw people on the shop floor because everything was robotic already at that point in time. So almost 35 years back, we were already having that kind of a technology, that a lot of vehicle manufacturing was already happening by robots. So, and the human beings really had already started to adapt to their new relationship with the machines on the shop floor. So it's now the only big difference is 35 years back, it happened to the blue collar workers. Today, it is happening to the white collars worker. Now, for some reason, we white collar workers never believed that it could happen to us, because we always thought we were the creators of that technology. But now we have come to the situation that that technology can do some of the things that we do for a living on a daily basis, and can play an increasingly larger role. It could be assistive role, it could be collaborative role, or in some cases, it could even appear to be that, hey, they can do it better than us. Now, how much of that has an impact on job is a separate issue, because to me, that's a very nuanced discussion again. It has a lot of discussion on the labor laws, it has a discussion on the demand supply, it has an equation even on the economic value of the labor and so on. It's not just a technology angle alone. So obviously those elements will have a big role to play in a given context. But these were some of the big callouts that came as essential conditions. But the human thing, I would still want to call out and say the successful adoptions that I have seen were highly associated with not treating humans as another cog in the wheel, but actually telling that humans are the first class citizens of that equation. Humans are why we exist in the first place, and the technology is there to help them. So people, when they were looking at building the use cases, and I call it as some kind of a cognitive collaboration. And a cognitive collaboration to me is essentially when the human beings and the, let's say, the AI agents or the agentic AI that people are talking about, they are in a working relationship with each other. Now, that could be as a collaborator, as a peer, it could be in a reporting relationship. For example, human beings are asking a certain output from the AI agents, and AI agents are giving, but the human beings hold the final control. It could be the other way around also, that human beings are creating certain output. Like, for example, when I was doing my PhD, we were using a software for our assignments. We had to turn in our assignments, and it would go to it would be scanned by that software. Now, that software is actually some kind of machine learning. It was before the generative AI. So essentially, my outcome as a human being, as a student, was being assessed by or evaluated an AI system to see whether it was there was any plagiarism in that or not. So these kind of agentic AIs have been around already for quite some time. I don't think there's anything new. I think what we will find interesting is that human beings are not ready for that. Our current organization behavior theory is built around the fact that human beings are the only workers and decision makers in the workplace. We do not have a notion in our organization behavior theory today that there can be non human actors who may also be making decisions in the organization. They may be making decisions about hiring. I mean, we are already hearing about how companies have been trying out AI based systems in hiring and so on. So this is a new world, in my view, which requires a very different kind of a context. We are not ready for it. I believe human beings are not ready for that kind of a thing. It's okay for us to use a generative AI thing to create an image or do a text prompt and build something. To me, that is what I call as the lowest form of productivity, like task productivity. So if my task was to read 10 reports every day and create a summary of in one A4 page, it would take me 4 hours. And now it takes me 10 minutes. It's a task productivity. I'm really gaining a lot of task productivity. But then I go to the next level where I look at a process and say, so, okay, so my process was, if somebody wanted to come to a customer support and said, how do I kind of resolve my issue? That entire process would be basically solved top to down. I'm able to kind of do that thing. That may improve the bottom line of the company. So that's improving my efficiency. But then simply because I am more efficient in my customer service may not be it may be necessary, but may not be enough for firm to be seen as a positive firm or a firm to actually show superior results on an ongoing basis. Like I always give the example of service design thinking. One of the examples that we in the service design thinking is you go and check into a hotel. You let's say it's late in the night and you reach a new city and you check into your hotel, and let's say you enter the room at 10 in the night. You are pleasantly surprised when you see everything is in harmony. The temperature of the room is already in the right way. The bed sheets are clean. The room is clean. It has a nice mild fragrance. The water is warm in the tap. All the things are in harmony with each other. Now, suppose somebody may say, hey, other things are basic. I'm just going to make sure that the room temperature is going to be taken care of. But other things are not, they are out of sync. Nobody is going to buy that experience simply because you have over optimized on one dimension, but you have ignored other dimensions. It's the same thing with generative AI, or take a broader discussion at a firm level. A customer is probably coming to a firm because they are saying, oh, you have great set of products. You have a very good, like the price point is very good. You have a great customer service. You do the updates at all the time there. It's availability. It is compatible with them. So there are like 20, 25, maybe 40 other elements that have to be also looked at. You just take one element and fine tune that and super optimize it cannot be good enough reason in my view, because it will become a commodity very soon. Because if you can do it, I can do it, right? That kind of a thing. So if you can build a chatbot and put it and apply and improve it, your customer service, I can do the same thing. Everybody, remember, it's a hype. We're in the hype period. Everybody is following the trends, right? So everybody can do it. So I think to me, the successful adoption is not going to stop at either the task productivity or the process efficiency. It will go to the next level, which is going to be really looking at the entire value chain of the firm and saying, can I really use this technology? Because people are saying it is a general purpose technology, it is a horizontal technology, it's a foundational technology, it can do million things. But am I actually using it for doing it? Simply because the technology is powerful, but I take it and I apply it at a one single point of application, I think that to me is not going to really work. You will get the lower order of productivity, no doubt about it. But is it really going to translate to the firm's strategic advantage? That to me is a bigger question in the long run. And yes, in my own framework that I'm putting as a part of my research, I'm calling it as a partial adoption. One can even argue that is it a successful adoption or a failure? Because if you bring generative AI with all the fanfare and all the power that you have seen, it can do all these zillion of things. But all you do is for creating a summary of the document for one or two people or some people in the organization. I would argue whether you have understood the context of what it means to actually adopt the technology at a firm level, or you are simply saying that I'm using a tool or I could have used another office productivity tool. So I'll just pause here, but I think those were some of the thoughts I found during my research.
And those were actually powerful nuggets. That reminds me of millimeter progress made in multiple dimensions rather than making some significant, tangible, noteworthy improvement when you truly understand the technology and know that, okay, beyond horizontal thing, what exactly I can make use of it.
You're spot on. I mean, one of the things that I strongly believe that there has to be an outside in approach as opposed to an inside out approach. What I mean is that the firm exists to really solve the customer's problems, and by building the right kind of products, solutions, or experiences, they essentially help alleviate the customer pains. Now, if they start basically parading their technology and say, hey, use this because this is the latest shiny technology, and customer is like, I don't really understand how you are solving my problem. It may be solving your problem because you want to
Yeah.
sell this technology to me, but it's clearly not solving my problem. If we look at it in various shapes and say, hey, listen to the customer, right? You look at Lean Startup or you look at Steve Blank's work on customer development model, the first thing he talks about is get out of the building and listen to the customer. So the key thing that people should not lose sight over, simply because of all the glitter of generative AI, is that any technology for that matter is first and foremost, if it is not being used to solve customers' problem, then I think we are just overusing that technology. And it may be good for me as a techie because I want to learn something new, but it may not be good for my market, for my customers. So I think that's the first important thing.
Yeah. And Tathagat, the point when you were mentioning what was the use case that your work you were passing through an AI tool for the plagiarism check, right?
That's
And
right.
that
Yeah.
that about the false positives, like in your work is not maybe AI generated, and then you run through a particular tool and it says that this is not your writing, this is actually AI generated. We don't have any mechanism to kind of deal with those scenarios. How did you kind of surpass that stage? Or maybe if you did encounter, how do you generally suggest somebody to be not erring on the wrong side?
So I think, yeah, so in this particular case, I didn't really have an option. What we did know was that they were using a certain tool, and what it was looking for was basically if I copied something and there were 19 words in a sequence that were exact copy of something that was available in some of the other research paper, it would flag it off as a plagiarism. Now,
Okay.
obviously, you may quote some work, and there are ethics in how you basically do scientific publications, and you have to respect the IP of others and cite the work properly.
Yeah.
So in this case, we didn't have a control, but I would go beyond it. So obviously, my intent was not to cheat it, but a lot of people absolutely do that all the time because they are copying from different people, and then they see. Other thing is also we talk about explainability, we talk about transparency of the algorithms. Let's say in this particular case, I know that the hack is 19 words have to be in sequence. Now I just do a minor change on the 17th word, and then I am kind of trying to game the system by doing it. I mean, anything that's been created by humans will have its own breakpoint. I think the point is, are you using it to really cheat the system, game the system, or you are using it to improve your effectiveness and productivity? To me, like I've been using, for example, another software for last couple of years, which helps me in when I do, because I've been doing a lot of writing. It helps me, and I do a lot of blogging as well. So it also comes on my blog on LinkedIn, for example. It advises me on grammatical mistakes, on better ways to writing. It uses some of the AI technologies to essentially recommend what may be a better way to write it. Now, it's the same thing. If I use it to really as a positive suggestion and actually improve my writing, then I think it's a positive use case. But if I use it to basically game the system and say, oh, I know that if I copy something, it will only check for 19. So I make a change in every 15th letter and I'm all safe. I mean, that's kind of, in my view, unethical usage of technology to do that. So,
This brings me back to the point that you were originally making. I think it's coming a full circle when you were saying AI is ready or not. We as humans need to be ready with when we are dealing with the technology, which side we use it for our own effectiveness versus trying to resort to unethical means. Before I close, the last question. How do you make yourself so up to date? I know for sure that you read a lot. So some of the books that you would like to, recommend.
Yes, I love reading. I read like 100 books a year or more. So absolutely, that's my interest area. I think the more important thing is I try to challenge myself by reading from very diverse set of fields. So I'm an eclectic learner. I read from history to geography to like war history, lot of things there. And because I think sometimes what happens is you are drinking from the same well and you keep just like you are feeding yourself exactly the same thing. So it's a confirmation bias that you are basically perpetuating, but you are not challenging your own mental models with what happens in other fields. How do people solve problem in other areas? So I think reading is definitely one thing. Second is talking to people. I think it's a very important thing because unless you talk, you do not really hear about what people are thinking, and you're not opening up yourself to diverse perspective. And thirdly, applying it is very important in my view, because if a knowledge is just kept to yourself, then I think it's of no use in my view. It has to be applied. And fourth is then sharing it freely with others. And I think that to me is kind of the whole cycle of really learning that happens. And every time you do that, it kind of becomes a flywheel and it really helps you to grow better and better.
Yeah.
These are the things that I've seen and I've used them. I really follow them. I don't know if that's how the listeners of this podcast also look at it, but I would certainly recommend to try it out.
I can sense it from your writings as well. And the one thing is a right way to gauge that you've understood a concept or learned something new is to share it with others and see how you're able to articulate yourself. One final book recommendation, whatever you're reading these days.
One I have read some time back, and it continues to be one of my favorite books, is a very interesting book with a very bizarre orbiting the giant hairball. A lot of people have not heard of that book. It is written by a guy by name Gordon McKinsey, and he was actually the creative director at Hallmark, which itself is a very creative company, right? Hallmark, we all know. And he wrote about how to stay creative, how to stay human from his personal experiences. And it's one of the most fabulous books that I can recommend to anybody. And I've been reading it for last 10 years. I almost read it every year. And I recommend everyone to take a paper copy of that. Don't get an ebook, because the way it has been annotated by Gordon himself is fabulous. So I would absolutely recommend that. And just a 30-minute spiel on the name itself, the way he says it is like a hairball is obviously a very nasty term. Like, hey, what is that? Looks a little uglish kind of a term. But he says this is how what happens is when the rules and regulations in a company, the new thing comes, and before we realize, it suddenly is like a hairball. Now, the biggest problem for creative people is do they kind of become a part of the bureaucracy and a part of the compliance and lose their creativity and individuality? And in many cases, they just get sucked by the gravity of and the hairball is actually a metaphor for the organization. So when you are a part of the organization, if you are not individual and not creative, what are the options to you? Sometimes people say, oh, I cannot work in this company because this company doesn't respect me. We talked about the failure thing, right? So somebody may say, oh, this company doesn't embrace the failures, it doesn't have the culture of failure, I go to another one. What are the odds that another one does not have the same kind of a thing? So you again become, and you cannot keep hopping throughout your life. Now, if you totally surrender, then you also become part of the same thing and you lose your creative edge. What Gordon McKinsey found out was that essentially the orbiting of the hairball, which is what is the metaphor that he talks about, is actually the way you can balance your creative urges and the creative bent of mind versus the organizational needs. Because there is a reason why those things exist for a firm. We may not see them, doesn't mean that the reason doesn't exist, right? But how do you really walk the middle of the road by balancing and orbiting the hairball is what this book is all about. It is not a self-help kind of a book. It's actually based on his personal experiences and so on. I would certainly recommend that book to anyone.
It's on my priority list now.
Thank you.
Okay. And Tathagat, just one thing, because you mentioned self-help. Do you actually read self-help books?
No. So I'll be honest, I used to read, but I gave up at some point in time because I realized that a lot of them were not really appealing to me, because I found that, like, people talk about storytelling, it is exactly the same thing. Storytelling is not a bad thing by itself. But when people are more like news reporters, I'm not saying, I'm not disparaging the profession, but I'm saying as a concept, would you rather be a news maker or a news reporter? So if people are kind of reporting the stories and they are telling other stories, I think they lose their authenticity very fast. But the people who are basically creating the stories, it doesn't matter if your communication skills are not like world class. What really matters is the authenticity of the situation and how you have kind of done that. What I found lacking in a lot of self-help was it was kind of very fluffy, that over a period of time, it was just creating do this, do that kind of a thing. And in most of the cases, I'm not even seeing a single personal reference or an anecdote of how that author has really come up with that perspective. What have they done to essentially claim that this is how they should be looking at things there? So in the absence of that, it just becomes like a lot of hand waving happening. And nobody can disagree with that. I'm not saying that it is all wrong. A lot of those things are universal truths. They are like truisms. Nobody can disagree with them. But I could not somehow relate to that. Now, others may disagree with me, which is perfectly fine. But I certainly feel that there are better ways of solving the problems.
That's amazing, and it was lovely. I think we covered a genre of things which I didn't originally expect us to do, but that's how the flow of conversation happened. Thanks a lot for coming today.
Oh, thanks, Vidhi. It was lovely catching up with you, and I enjoyed the conversations. Thank you.
Yeah, so do I. Thank you.